Under the pale gray sky of the late afternoon, Lieutenant Leon Carter quietly walked through the dense forest. The damp autumn air filled his senses, carrying the scent of decaying wood and fallen leaves. The rustling of his footsteps on the moist ground blended with his steady breathing, creating a silent symphony between nature and man. It was just another routine patrol, but the instincts of a seasoned soldier told him that today would be different. Moving between towering trees covered in green moss, Leon could clearly hear the distant calls of birds, the wind whispering through the canopy, and occasionally, the soft sounds of small creatures hidden within the undergrowth. He was familiar with this place, but familiarity never meant letting his guard down. Every snapped twig, every unusual noise could be a sign of danger. This land was not just home to harmless wildlife. It was also a hiding place for threats unknown. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed behind him. It was barely a whisper, but the instincts ingrained in him over years of service made Leon halt immediately. His body tensed, his right hand instinctively moving to rest on the pistol at his hip while his sharp eyes scanned the surroundings. His heartbeat pounded in his chest as he turned around, ready to confront whatever was lurking behind him. But instead of an enemy or a dangerous predator, he saw something unexpected: a small bear cub, its brown fur glistening in the slivers of light filtering through the trees. Standing just a few steps away, its round, black eyes gazed at him, not with fear, but with curiosity and something else, something that almost felt like expectation. Leon remained still. He knew how dangerous this situation could be. A bear cub was never alone. If its mother was nearby, he could be in serious trouble. An enraged mother bear was the last thing anyone wanted to face. His eyes darted around, listening for any signs of an adult bear's presence. But there was nothing. No heavy footsteps, no sharp breaths, no low growls of warning. The bear cub stood there, blinking its wide eyes as if assessing him. Then, unexpectedly, it took a small step forward. Its tiny paws crunched softly against the dry leaves, a gentle sound in the otherwise silent forest. Leon tightened his grip on his holstered gun but did not draw it. He had no intention of harming the creature, but he could not afford to let his guard down either. "What's going on here?" he muttered under his breath, the words barely audible even to himself. The bear cub halted, tilted its head up at him, and after a brief moment, let out a soft cry. The sound was not threatening. It carried a strange, pleading tone. Leon furrowed his brows, hesitating for a moment before crouching down to get a better look. The cub did not retreat. It simply stood there, its bright eyes reflecting the fading daylight. Now that he was closer, Leon could see it more clearly. Its fur, though soft, was slightly dirty, with dried mud clinging to its paws. And then he noticed something else. It looked thinner than a normal bear cub should. A thought flickered in his mind. Had it lost its mother? "Are you looking for someone?" Leon whispered, half expecting no answer. But then, as if understanding his words, the cub turned its head toward a different direction, then looked back at him, like it was trying to lead him somewhere. Leon felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't normal. Wild animals didn't seek human help unless they were desperate. Leon knew he shouldn't interfere with nature. His duty was to patrol, not to rescue wildlife. But looking into the cub's eyes, something inside him refused to let him walk away. After a moment of hesitation, Leon stood up, keeping a safe distance but still following the small bear. It led him deeper into the forest, weaving through thick bushes and towering trees. The ground beneath his boots grew softer, an indication that they were nearing a water source. Before long, the sound of running water reached his ears. A small stream came into view, and on its banks, Leon saw something that made him freeze in place. A mother bear lay motionless on the ground. Her fur was matted with dirt and damp from the water. There were visible scratches on her body. But what was most alarming was the way she lay, completely still, showing no signs of life. The bear cub rushed to her side, letting out heart-wrenching cries. It nudged against her, trying to wake her. But there was no response. Leon clenched his fists. He wasn't sure what had happened, but it was clear that she had either been injured or had collapsed from exhaustion before reaching the stream. Maybe she had traveled too far searching for food and became too weak. Maybe she had been wounded in a fight with another predator. Whatever the reason, one thing was certain: the cub wouldn't survive alone. Without its mother, it would become easy prey for other predators in the wild. Leon exhaled heavily. This wasn't his responsibility. He was not a park ranger or a wildlife expert. But no matter how much logic told him to walk away, his heart refused. Looking at the bear cub still huddled close to its mother's body, Leon knew he only had one choice. He couldn't leave them here to die. Kneeling down, he reached out toward the cub, his voice softer than it had been in a long time. "Hey, little one, come with me." Leon looked down at the bear cub, then back at the trail ahead. The instincts of a soldier urged him to continue his patrol, to leave the small creature behind and complete his mission. It was the logical choice. Yet, as soon as he took a step forward, the sound of tiny footsteps echoed behind him. The bear cub was still following him. He stopped, turned around, his brows furrowing in confusion. "What are you doing?" he muttered. The cub stopped as well, tilting its head up at him with its deep, dark eyes. There was something in its gaze that made Leon feel uneasy, an unspoken plea, a fear he couldn't quite describe. It wasn't acting like a normal wild animal. It wasn't afraid of him, nor did it seem wary. Instead, it just stood there, as if it was waiting for something. Leon tried to scare it off, waving his hands and making loud noises. "Go away, you can't follow me." But the bear cub didn't move. It simply tilted its head, as if it either didn't understand or refused to acknowledge his command. In the end, it let out a soft cry, a sound so small yet so heartbreaking, like it was begging him not to leave. Leon sighed, stepping back and crouching down to get a closer look. Now that he was paying attention, he noticed something he had missed earlier. His fur was matted with dirt, stained with patches of dried mud, and looked dry and unkempt. It didn't have the healthy appearance of a well-fed cub. Instead, it looked thin, almost frail. Its eyes carried an overwhelming sense of desperation. A thought flashed through his mind. This wasn't just a lost bear cub. It was looking for help. Leon felt an internal conflict rising within him. Should he intervene? This was completely outside the scope of his duty. But the logic of a soldier could not suppress the instinct of a human. He couldn't turn his back on this helpless creature. Slowly, he bent down further, meeting the cub's gaze. "Do you want me to help you?" he murmured, half expecting no response. But then, as if answering him, the cub turned its head toward another direction, then looked back at him. Its actions weren't random. It was trying to tell him something. Leon exhaled sharply. He knew that if he followed the cub, he would be straying from his designated patrol route. That meant venturing into the denser parts of the forest, where unpredictable dangers lurked. But he also knew he couldn't just walk away without understanding the situation. "All right," he muttered, almost as if making a reluctant truce with himself. "Lead the way." The bear cub didn't hesitate. It turned and began moving into the thick underbrush, stepping carefully through the dense foliage. Leon followed, keeping his senses alert. Even though he had made the decision to help, he couldn't forget that this was still the wilderness. Anything could happen. The deeper they went, the darker the forest became. Towering trees formed a natural canopy overhead, blocking out most of the sunlight. Only a few golden rays pierced through the leaves, casting scattered patches of light on the forest floor. The air grew heavier, the silence more pronounced. Leon noticed it immediately, the unnatural quiet. A living forest was never truly silent. Birds should have been singing, insects should have been chirping, and the wind should have carried the rustling of leaves. But now, there was nothing. Something wasn't right. Leon halted, scanning his surroundings. The dry leaves under his boots crunched softly. indicating they had been left undisturbed for a long time. A faint, unfamiliar scent lingered in the air. Something off. Something unsettling. The bear cub continued ahead, but its pace slowed. 2. Seemed to sense the eerie atmosphere. Gone was the energetic urgency from earlier now. The steps were hesitant. The small body tense. Leon's hand instinctively went to the gun at his hip. He didn't want to use it, but in an environment like this, preparedness was crucial. After about 5 minutes, they reached a small clearing in the forest. What Leon saw made him freeze. A disturbed patch of land. Trees here had been snapped or uprooted, as if something massive had moved through. The ground bore marks of struggle, deep gouges in the earth, and prints that weren't just bear tracks. They were larger, heavier. Claw marks ran up the nearby trees, long and jagged, and the air carried the faint, metallic scent of dried blood. The bear cub stopped near a fallen tree, sniffing around as if searching for something. Leon stepped forward, crouching down to examine the ground. There were clear signs of a scuffle, mixed tracks, deep claw marks. A fight had taken place here. Leon's mind worked quickly, piecing together the clues. Had the cub's mother been attacked? By what? Another bear? Predator? The tracks didn't match anything he had encountered before. Then the cub let out a small whimper and moved toward a specific spot. It sniffed the ground, then began pawing at the earth as if trying to uncover something. Leon approached, his heart pounding slightly. Something was buried here. Swallowing. He knelt down and began brushing away the layer of dead leaves. And then he saw it. A torn fragment of animal hide, perhaps from a bear, perhaps from something else. But what made his blood run cold was the way it had been torn apart. It wasn't the aftermath of a normal predator attack. This was something different, something violent, something unnatural. Leon inhaled deeply, forcing himself to stay calm. He looked at the cub, now trembling slightly, eyes wide with fear. There was something in this forest, something wrong, and Leon knew. He couldn't leave without finding out the truth. Leon felt his heartbeat quicken as the surrounding forest sank into an eerie silence. Every sign of life seemed to have vanished. No birdsong, no chirping insects, not even the whisper of wind through the trees. A deep unease settled in his chest. His instincts as a soldier told him that something was wrong. But no matter what, he continued following the small bear cub's tracks, carefully scanning his surroundings. Every step he took on the decaying leaves seemed unnaturally loud, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The cub walked ahead of him, his pace quicker now, its small body trembling with anxiety. It no longer hesitated or wandered, it moved straight forward, as if it knew exactly where it was leading him. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Leon almost stumbled over it as it came to an abrupt halt, its entire body trembling. A small, sorrowful whimper escaped from its mouth, filled with pain and despair. Before Leon could react, the cub bolted forward, rushing through the thick foliage toward a clearing ahead. Leon's breath caught in his throat as he saw what lay before him. A mother bear lay motionless on the ground. At first glance, Leon thought she was dead. Her massive body was still, her dark brown fur covered in dirt and scattered leaves. But as he stepped closer, he noticed the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, but only barely. The bear cub ran to her side, nuzzling against her neck and crying out in distress. It nudged her repeatedly, desperately trying to wake her, but she was too weak to respond. Only a faint, ragged breath escaped her throat. Leon crouched beside them, studying the situation closely, and then he saw the wound on her front leg, a deep gash, seeping darkened blood, her flesh torn with the unmistakable marks of a steel trap. Leon clenched his jaw as realization hit him. Poachers. The mother bear must have stepped into a hidden trap, somehow breaking free. But the injury was too severe. She had lost too much strength to go any further. A slow, burning anger ignited in Leon's chest. He had seen too many acts of cruelty against nature. But witnessing this firsthand, Seeing the suffering caused by human greed made his blood boil. A creature as powerful as this bear was now reduced to this, lying helpless, on the verge of death, because of a trap meant to kill. He looked at the bear cub, still pawing at its mother, eyes filled with desperation. It didn't understand what was happening, but it knew its mother wasn't okay. And Leon knew that if he did nothing, both of them wouldn't survive. Slowly, he removed his backpack, rummaging through it for the first aid kit he always carried during patrols. This wasn't part of his mission, but as a soldier, he was trained to handle wounds not just for humans, but for any life that needed saving. He pulled out a roll of gauze, antiseptic, and took a deep breath before approaching the mother bear. The cub watched him warily, his body tensed in uncertainty, but it didn't growl or try to stop him. Maybe, somehow, it understood that he was trying to help. Leon carefully lifted the bear's injured leg, examining the wound. The blood had started to dry around the edges, but the center was still oozing a dark, infected fluid. If this infection spread, she wouldn't last much longer. He soaked a clean cloth with antiseptic and gently wiped around the wound. The bear twitched, her breathing quickening slightly, but she was too weak to resist. Leon worked quickly, cleaning away dirt and dried blood before wrapping the wound tightly in gauze to slow further infection. His movements were precise, but his mind was racing. This was only a temporary solution. Without proper medical care, the mother bear might still not survive. He looked at the cub, now sitting beside its mother, watching him intently. It didn't understand what Leon was doing, but it seemed to sense that he was trying to help. Leon exhaled, stepping back to assess the situation. He couldn't just leave them here without a plan. But moving the mother bear by himself was nearly impossible. She was too large, too heavy, and too weak to walk. The only option was to call for help. He reached for the radio strapped to his belt. Even though the signal was weak in this part of the forest, he had to try. "This is Lieutenant Leon Carter, reporting an emergency situation," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I found a severely injured mother bear, likely caught in a poacher's trap. She's alive but in critical condition, requesting immediate assistance." The radio crackled with static for a moment before a voice responded. "Leon, we copy. Can you give us your coordinates?" Leon glanced at his wrist-mounted GPS and relayed his location. "I'm north of the reserve, near a small stream." "Understood. We're dispatching a rescue team now. Hold your position." Leon nodded, even though they couldn't see him. "Understood. Get here as soon as you can." He clipped the radio back onto his belt and turned to the two bears. The cub was no longer whimpering, just sitting beside its mother, its round eyes never leaving Leon. He sighed and sat down on a nearby rock, scanning the trees for any movement. His patrol had taken a completely unexpected turn, but he didn't regret it. In the middle of a silent, dangerous forest, surrounded by the evidence of human cruelty, he had chosen not to turn away, and he knew it was the right choice. Leon took a deep breath, gripping his radio tightly as the fragmented voice on the other end crackled through the static. The wildlife rescue team had received his distress call, but the bad news was that they were too far away. It would take them at least a few hours to reach his location. Staring down at the mother bear, her breathing weak and labored, Leon knew that every second was a race against time. If he waited too long, she wouldn't make it. There was no other choice. He had to act. Quickly, he checked the medical supplies in his kit. The amount of gauze he had wouldn't be enough for proper treatment, but at the very least, could stop the bleeding temporarily. He poured more antiseptic onto the wound, cleaning away the dried blood before wrapping the gauze tighter to prevent further infection. The mother bear twitched slightly as he secured the bandage, but she was too weak to resist. That only made Leon more anxious. Lifting his gaze, he saw the bear cub standing close to its mother, its small whimpers filling the air. It didn't stop making those quiet, pleading sounds, as if trying to urge its mother to keep fighting. The sight stirred something deep inside Leon. a burning need to act. He couldn't leave them here to die. Looking around, he realized he had to move the mother bear to safety to the base camp. Only there would he have the proper tools and personnel to give her a real chance at survival. But there was a major problem. She was too heavy, and he couldn't carry her on his own. Frowning in thought, Leon remembered a survival technique he had learned during training, building an emergency stretcher using ropes and sturdy branches. If he could fashion a makeshift sled, he might just be able to transport her. Without hesitation, he got to work. He searched the area for strong branches, using his knife to cut them down to the right size for a stable frame. Then, he pulled out the rope from his backpack, securing the branches tightly together to create a stretcher. To provide some cushioning, he laid his jacket over the wooden frame, making sure it wouldn't scrape against the mother bear's injuries. Once it was ready, he crouched down and carefully slid his arms under the bear's massive body, preparing to lift her onto the stretcher. As soon as he touched her, the bear cub let out a panicked cry. But when it saw that Leon wasn't harming her, fell silent. Watching intently, Leon gritted his teeth, summoning all his strength to lift the bear. She was heavier than he had anticipated. Every muscle in his body burned as he strained to move her onto the stretcher. Beads of sweat rolled down his forehead as he finally succeeded, his arms trembling from the effort. Tying a rope around his waist, he secured it to the stretcher and prepared to pull. The moment he took the first step, he realized just how difficult this would be. The terrain was rough, filled with exposed roots and uneven ground, making every movement a struggle. The weight of the mother bear pulled at his back, sending sharp pains through his muscles. But he clenched his jaw and kept moving. The bear cub walked beside him, never leaving its mother's side. Every time he paused to catch his breath, the cub let out small cries, almost as if begging him to keep going. Leon met its gaze, then looked back at the unconscious bear. Stopping wasn't an option. Step by step, he dragged the stretcher through the thick forest. As the sun began to set, darkness crept in, making the path even more treacherous. His legs ached, his breath grew heavier, but he forced himself to push forward. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore, it was a fight for survival. After what felt like an eternity, Leon's shirt was drenched in sweat, his arms shaking from exhaustion. The weight of the stretcher felt unbearable. He was reaching his limit. Then, through the darkness, he saw it. Light. The glow of the base camp. A surge of adrenaline shot through him. He was close, digging deep into his last reserves of strength. He inhaled sharply and shouted with all the energy he had left. "Is anyone there? I need help." His voice echoed through the silent night. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. Then suddenly, movement, voices, the sound of footsteps rushing toward him. Flashlights pierced through the forest. "There! It's Leon." A group of soldiers ran toward him, their faces shifting from confusion to shock as they took in the sight. Leon, drenched in sweat, pulling a massive bear on a makeshift stretcher, while a tiny bear cub trembled beside them. For a brief second, they were speechless. Then, without hesitation, they jumped into action. "Jesus, you dragged it all the way here?" one of them asked, eyes wide as they helped him unfasten the ropes. "No other choice," Leon panted, his chest rising and falling heavily. "She wouldn't have survived if I left her." The team wasted no time. They lifted the mother bear and rushed her toward the medical area while the on-site veterinarians began assessing her injuries. The bear cub followed closely, never straying from its mother's side. Leon stood there, his vision slightly blurred from exhaustion as he watched the rescue efforts unfold. His body was spent, his muscles screamed in protest. But for the first time since this ordeal began, he felt a sense of relief. He had done it. Between the fine line of life and death, between the shadows and the light, he had chosen not to give up. And now, with the mother bear receiving the care she needed and the cub still by her side, every moment of struggle, every ounce of pain, had been worth it. After hours of tension and worry, The long-awaited news from the Wildlife Rescue Center finally arrived. The mother bear had survived the critical stage. Her wounds had been carefully treated. The infection was under control, and now she was gradually recovering. Upon hearing these words, Leon felt as if a massive weight had been lifted from his chest. He wasn't sure how long he had been holding his breath. He only knew that, at this moment, a deep sense of relief washed over him. He knew he had to visit them before his mission ended. This wasn't just a duty anymore. It was something his heart told him he needed to do. As soon as he could, Leon drove to the rescue center where the mother bear and her cub were being cared for. When his vehicle came to a stop, he stepped out and took a deep breath. The air at the center was much fresher than the dense forest where he had spent those grueling hours. As a soldier, he was accustomed to hardship. But the journey he had taken with the little bear cub and the life-or-death rescue had left an imprint on him, one that words could not describe. He walked toward the rehabilitation area where the bears were being kept. As soon as he saw them, a warmth spread through his chest. The mother bear was resting on a soft bed of straw. Her eyes open but drowsy, no longer clouded with pain. She was getting stronger. The cub, as always, remained by her side, nestled close to her, a living testament to the unbreakable bond of love between mother and child. Then, something unexpected happened. The bear cub suddenly lifted its head, its round eyes locking onto him. For a brief moment, it was as if time itself had frozen. And then, recognizing the man who had saved its mother, the cub dashed toward the fence. Leon stood still as he watched it press its tiny paws against the enclosure, its eyes shining with recognition and gratitude. No longer was there the desperate, pleading look from their first encounter in the forest. Now, there was something deeper: trust, an unspoken thank you. Leon felt his heart tighten slightly. In all his years as a soldier, he had witnessed so much loss, pain, the brutality of war, and the silent sacrifices of those who served. But never had he experienced something as pure as this: life, love, and gratitude that needed no words. Slowly, he knelt down, resting a hand lightly against the fence. The cub did not back away, nor did it show fear. It simply stood there, gazing at him, eyes reflecting something he had never seen in another living being before: a connection, an unexplainable bridge between human and nature, between two souls who, under normal circumstances, were never meant to cross paths. He wasn't sure how long he stayed there, only that, in that moment, he was no longer Lieutenant Leon Carter, the soldier bound to duty, but just a man who had chosen to do the right thing, not because of orders, but because some things were bigger than duty, things like kindness, compassion, and love. Then, as if sensing that this was their final meeting, the cub let out a small sound. But this time, it was not the heartbreaking whimper of despair from their first encounter. It was a farewell, a gentle, grateful goodbye. Leon felt something sting at the corner of his eyes, but he simply smiled. He didn't need to say anything, because everything had already been said through their gaze. He stood up, turned, and walked away, leaving behind a mother and her cub, safe and together in peace. For the first time in a long time, he left not just with the weight of duty on his shoulders, but with a heart full of warmth.